It is March 12th. I am fortunate to be with Kirk Spradley, aka Tadpole, upcoming or current author, I should say. He's got a book on the way. And so, Kirk, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from?
Absolutely. I was born in Pascagoula, Mississippi. I grew up in Mobile, Alabama. Um, and then the military stuff. Currently, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, with my wife, my two daughters. I have three dogs and two cats, and that kind of takes my focus at this point in life.
That's awesome. I've been to Mobile, and I so happened to be there. Appalachian State was playing a bowl game
Yeah,
there, and I was there when Mardi Gras started, and that's all I'll say on
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So it was a phenomenal place. So, Kirk, growing up, did you have a lot of veterans in your life or veterans around you?
I did. Let's see. My father wanted to serve. He was in a plane crash. He was a aeronautical engineer, and then he flew agricultural, crop dusting on weekends. That's what he really wanted to do, but it didn't pay the bills. And he was older. He was 55 when I was born, so he was in the World War II generation, and he wanted to fly for the Navy, but he was in a plane crash. He lost his legs; they were amputated below the knees. Um, but he was very certainly fascinated with military and things of that nature. I had one uncle who was in Iwo Jima. He was
Wow.
not in the initial invasion, but he did serve on Iwo Jima in, I want to say, February, March timeframe, 1945, which you and your viewers probably know that was the first American battle where Americans had more casualties than the enemy. I had another uncle who was in the Normandy invasion. He was not on June 6th, but he did land on the beach within, I want to say, the first 5 or 6 days. Not an infantry guy or anything like that, but he was in Normandy. And so, listening to their stories, and I don't know if my dad gave me the books. I just don't remember, but I remember reading a lot of stories of World War II. Um, First book ever read was Guadalcanal Diary, about the Marines in Guadalcanal, and it was just so fascinating. And by the time I got to high school, I found the Vietnam books, the firsthand accounts of Vietnam, and I was just mesmerized by these people, certainly, and what they did.
Absolutely. I mean, as a teenager and a kid, I could share those same sentiments reading World War II, Vietnam, and just wanting to dive into the detail of what it was truly like. And a lot of my studies gravitated towards the Marine Corps. And you and I initially shared that in our first conversations with Doc's book about Force Recon.
That's right. His was one of the first Vietnam books I read, and this guy was just a legend, and I served in Force Recon at a time where we still had some Vietnam guys around, and there were guys that knew him, and this guy he wrote a book, and I read his book, and he was larger than life, and then you start kind of meeting your heroes, and it's like just an incredible experience, but absolutely, and thank you for getting his story out there because I don't think it got a lot of play. Over the years, social media didn't exist during that time, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for getting his story out there.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, it's an honor to call Doc a friend. It's an honor to be able to just interview him and talk and dissect his book, Force Recon Diary 69 and 70. And that's opened up a lot of doors. And that's one of the reasons we're here today. So, in high school, did you have your mind set on the Marine Corps when you knew about military service and Guadalcanal Diary? Was that the goal?
No, not at all. In fact, it was a total accident getting into the Marines. Well, I'll tell you the story. To answer your question, I wanted to go in the Army. Um, I wanted to I wanted to go Army SF, Special Forces as a career. I didn't think I should start there. I think I should get kind of a baseline somewhere else. And I thought the Rangers would be a good kind of a building block, if you will. Go there and because of what the Rangers were doing in the 80s and the 90s. Now it's different today. They're um, more heavily entrenched in SOCOM, but at the time they would go after strategic targets, and like they would do airfield seizure was a big mission for them, and I was fascinated by that mission. They did it in Grenada, they did it in Panama, um, and they did some other things in Desert Storm. But so my goal was to go in the Army and be a Ranger, get out, go to college, and then go into Army Special Forces as an officer.
Wow. And so, with that being said, how in the hell did you end up in the Corps?
Yeah, great question. So funny story if you got time.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
I was in college, and it wasn't. I knew I had to get a degree, but it wasn't the mentality just wasn't what I was. I don't know, man. It wasn't challenging, and I don't mean no offense. If people out there just really got their ass kicked in college, man, I didn't think it was challenging. I didn't think certainly the history professors. I was really disappointed with their lack of knowledge of history. I was like, I know more than this guy, and he's the professor. So that was disappointing. So I really wasn't digging college, although it's they always tell you have to go. That's not the case, but I believed it at the time. Um, I just really wasn't feeling it, man. I was like, man, this is going to be a terrible 4 years. Um, but Desert Shield kicked off. Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait to recoup money that he believed he had lost during the Iran-Iraq War, which was 7 years, basically a stalemate back in the 80s. The Iranians and the Iraqis fought a war, and didn't move the border at all. But millions of young men were killed, unfortunately, as happens in war. We talk about that as much as you want, but very wealthy, powerful men make decisions, and young men go and um, pay the price, if you will, and it happens throughout history, and that was just one of millions of wars throughout our history. But Iran and Iraq fought a war for about 7 years, and Saddam, sent his army, what was left of his army, down to Kuwait to essentially rob the bank. Kuwaitis are very they didn't have much of an army, and they had never considered that they would have to fight anywhere, certainly their neighbor to the north. But Saddam went down there and seized a great deal of the oil fields and things of that nature. And so that was like the first time in my life that I saw this potential for a major war. Now I'd seen Grenada on TV and I saw Panama on TV, but these were kind of strikes, if you will, short duration missions. Not that I would have, not that I'm putting that down. I mean, combat is combat. But I was kind of really looking for this. Uh, I mean, to experience what I'd read in so many books. To be honest with you, I wanted to experience it, and I thought this was my opportunity. I chose the Marines because if I went to like SF or the Rangers or SEALs or something like that, man, I'd be in training for years, and I didn't think it would last that long. And my goal was to get experience before I went to SF and to get combat experience. And it was just an academic decision. Like, man, the Marines are definitely going to go to war. And compared to the special ops units, their training would be shorter. I could go in the infantry and I would go to war. So that's what I did. I joined the Marines.
Wow. I mean, and through that, I get it. I mean, oftentimes the Marines are the first to respond to crisis and have been so well renowned in the world as excellent fighters and some other words we will not use at this time. Now, boot camp wise, you enlist. Where do you get sent to boot camp?
I go to Parris Island, South Carolina.
And how was that introduction?
Well, let me tell you, funny story. The introduction was, they fly you there commercially, and you get off at the airport, and they kind of round you up and put you on a bus. Well, I'm on the airplane, and I'm sitting next to this, older gentleman. I don't know, he's probably 40 something years old. I say older. I'm 51, but now, But we were talking. He's like, "What are you doing in Charleston?" I was like, "Well, I just joined the Marines." And he was like, "Congratulations, that's great, man." He goes, um, I was in Vietnam, and that's my boss sitting. That's my former boss sitting like 6 seats up, and I look 6 seats in front of me, and there's an older distinguished gentleman in a suit, and I look at the guy, and I was like, "That was your boss?" And he starts laughing. He goes, "Well, kind of, sort of. That was General." Oh man, now I'm drawing a blank. He was the Westmoreland. He goes, that was General Westmoreland, the commander of American forces in Vietnam. Now, I'd read about this guy. You know what I mean? This is like a famous person to an 18-year-old. And I'm like, oh my God, that's General Westmoreland. He goes, yeah, man. I guarantee you, man, if you walked up to him, when you get to your destination or whatever, and shake his hand, I guarantee you he'd shake your hand and tell you thank you for doing what you're doing. And so I'm all excited to meet General Westmoreland, right? The plane lands, we get off, and I'm trying to find General Westmoreland, man. And here comes the drill instructor, and he's like, Spradley, you're going in to Paris Island or whatever. And I'm like, yes, sir. He's like, come over here. And it's like this long line of very sad faces, and everybody's kind of, real close together and looking down at the floor. And I'm like, well, that was my chance to meet General Westmoreland, but I guess he lived in Charleston. But so that was literally my introduction to the Marines. And then, of course, getting to Paris Island and all the craziness there.
Well, that's incredible. I mean, to think about, you were that close to meeting one of the more interesting figures in American military history.
Sure. Yeah, he was just a few seats in front of me on a plane.
Wow. Now, with that, what's your first day of boot camp like?
First day of boot camp, we get there, and you're very much worried about getting in trouble, because you see dudes getting smoked all over the place, man, just getting thrashed for like minor offenses. I mean, these dudes are all about discipline and all that. And remember, I didn't really want to be in the Marines. I knew this would be good training, but this was kind of like a resume builder for me. You know what I mean? I mean, I know that sounds bad, but that was kind of my thought process. So it was like, hey man, just get through this shit and learn. But man, I'm meeting people who wanted to be Marines since they were like 8 years old, and this is their dream come true. This is their chance to get what they want out of life. So I kind of started looking at it a little differently, like, hey man, don't act like you don't want to be here, man. They're people who this is all they've wanted to do in their life, man. This is, and you can see the joy in their. I mean, it sucks being on Paris Island. Certainly, there's no fun to be had, but literally, they're living their dream. They have gotten to where they wanted to be, and you're just kind of what's the word, energized by that. I mean, because you're like, fuck, man, I got to get through this in infantry school and blah, 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 blah. But then you're looking at a guy like, man, I'm here. This is Paris Island. Everyone's heard of Paris Island. And you're like, yeah, you're right, man. So I started taking more pride in it at that time.
That's awesome. Now, with that, your instructors, how are they?
Great, great question. So they were, I kind of sort of picked it up on day one, not really, but I picked it up over the time. Their uniforms and their personal appearance was impeccable. Their speech was, there was, I'm not going to say there wasn't yelling. There was yelling, but they had booming voices, and they never asked you to do something that they didn't already do. Now, you had to kind of step back and observe it. They're not going to tell you that. Like, at no time did they ever say, we're on this road march with you, we're doing this 5-mile run with you. They never say that. You just have to figure it out. And then, man, if you put your head down and you're just trying to get through the training, which, hey, not judging anybody. I mean, it's tough stuff, but you may not see that. But I've always been a people watcher. And I was like, man, these guys are doing everything we're doing, but with perfect uniforms on. And that was a big thing. Years later in my life, when I met former drill instructors, I would bring that up, and they would say, yeah, it's part of the training to become a drill instructor. It's a really big deal. One of the differences, when people ask me the difference between the Army and the Marines, one of the big differences is that the Marine Corps will take some of their more talented people and give them training and put them in some type of leadership or instructor position, so that the first time you see a Marine, you're seeing the kind of the best the Marines have to offer. The Army takes some of their best people, and there's good and bad to both techniques. They take some of their best people and put them in line units, deployable units. And the theory is when you go to combat, this will be you will have some of our better leaders will be in charge of the combat forces. And it's two different techniques, and there's pluses and minuses to both. But that's kind of the difference in mentalities that I saw, the difference between the Army and the Marines.
That's incredibly interesting too. And I guess being in boot camp, seeing your instructors doing the drills with you, that gives you respect for your leaders, and it sets the tone that in the Marine Corps, if you're going to be a leader, you do what's asked of you, but at the same time, you set the example. You know, if your men got to do something that's really shitty, then you do it with them.
Absolutely. And again, it almost, I don't want to say it, I want to say this the right way. It almost ruined me for regular life, because man, you just see, and again, man, there's problems everywhere you go, but one of the, not my drill instructor, but one of the drill instructors in the company he had been one of the few survivors from the Beirut barracks bombing. And
Wow.
here he is running and PT, and he's got his face was just totally reconstructed. And later on, when you get to know people, they loosen up a little bit, you know, because you're going to be in the Marine, you're going to see these people out in the fleet, so they don't want the drill instructor stuff to go too far, you know. I mean, you know, they're not your buddy, but later on in training, they do open up a little bit and give a little bit of their self. And he would put his photo album up on the quarterdeck, so that if you were going to the head or something like that, later in the training, you know, on the third month, you could kind of look through some of the pictures, and you know, that's combat. You know what I mean? Beirut was combat for the Marines. That's a legendary thing. But you know, he recovered, at least physically. You know, mentally, I'm sure he carried it with him his whole life. But you're just inspired by these people. We had I want to say he was a full bird colonel who had the Medal of Honor, and the guy, I think he was surrounded or something in Vietnam, and he saw his only chance of survival was to call in an airstrike on his own position. He's like, look, they're going to kill me. You know, they're going to kill all my Marines. They're going to kill me, but I'm taking them with me. And that was a decision he made from a leadership standpoint. And they actually all survived. I mean, the airstrike, you know, killed the enemy. So he was, again, you're looking at the officers and you're looking at the NCOs, and they just all seem to have this incredible level of professionalism and things of that nature. And I rarely found that again later in life. I had to really, really search to find anything even close to that in my life. And it was always disappointing, because that was your first impression of life, I guess, is these very motivated, capable, competent leaders. You know, these are just incredible people. So everywhere you're going to go, you're going to be around people like this. Well, no, that's not the case. And so you will always look back on times like that and just kind of be like, man, I wish we had more people like that, you know?
No kidding. Well, I mean, and that kind of in a way explains why many Marines have problems adjusting to civilian life after they exit the Marine Corps.
Absolutely. And I don't, you know, and I was on a few podcasts, and the story always comes up, you know, what'd you do when you get out of the Marines, type of thing. I was 100% convinced that I would have a law enforcement career. I felt like if I'm going to be in society, that's where I fit in, being a protector, going after bad guys, things of that nature. I could never get a job. No one was interested in my military background. And like I said, having served as a Force Recon Marine, that at the time, the Marine Corps was the most elite service, and Force Recon was the most elite unit in the Marines. So you're coming out of the top of the food chain, and you're like, yeah, man, I got this, man. I'm going to, show my resume, and I'm good. I could never get a job as a police officer. The only organizations that were consistently looking for my skill set was the nightclub business. So I spent 8 years of my life as a bouncer because that's the only job I could find.
Drastically different from being a Force Recon Marine too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and kind of going to that and eventually segueing into Force Recon, I mean, it's incredible to think that, you've got this experience. You are one of the most elite trained professionals in the world for your craft, and yet no one's willing to hire you. It just boggles the mind. Why?
Yeah. What I what I found, I don't know this to be true, but I've talked to people who did get into law enforcement, and just getting experience with life and how people think. There's that idealistic version of the world, and there's the real world. And what I've come to believe, or at least what has been told to me, is that there's a great deal of kind of, I hate to use the word jealousy and butthurt. People wanted to be the kings of their little fiefdoms, and they had been in a SWAT team, a local SWAT team or something, for X amount of years, and maybe they didn't have any military background or whatever. And then here you come trying to join, and they're like, I don't want that guy. Well, you can't come up with a logical reason as to why you don't want some like that. And so they made it up, or they lost the paperwork, or whatever. But man, I just never got a job. I could never ever get a job. And I knew guys that were pulling for me. And that's another thing, is there is a level of nepotism with public service occupation, whether it's the fire department, police department, or wherever, DMV. You have to know somebody, man. And the guys that I saw that were getting the jobs were like cousins of police commissioners, or things of that nature. And it's like, man, in my mind, I'm like, what happens when there's a gunfight? What happens when there's a bank robbery? What happens when a guy goes crazy and starts shooting up an office or a school or something? What then? And I brought that up in the '90s, and so did all my buddies. All my buddies were veterans, and we always talked about that, and people just kind of blew it off. Well, fast forward to today, and you see the school shootings and the police failing to go in. Well, that's your result. Your result is dead children. Your result is dead Americans. And we told you about this back in the '90s. So no one should act like they're surprised by this. We told you years ago, decades ago, that this was going to be the result. So don't act surprised. I know a number of combat veterans, special operations veterans, et cetera, who are underemployed, very much underemployed. Their skill set is not being utilized. And the jobs that, in my opinion, they should have are being filled by you know, uh, less than capable people, shall
Well,
we say.
and it's unfortunate that the politics behind that has to play into it. Of the do you know someone? And I see that in education. A lot of the jobs I see
Oh, yeah.
people getting offered as teachers or coaches, and this is even from my own personal experience when I was job hunting. You got to know somebody, and if you don't, your resume doesn't matter.
That's exactly correct. And I would put that under public service as well. Um, the school system, especially like the county school system, local school, man, you got to know somebody, man.
Yep.
And I wish it weren't that way, man, but that's kind of the reality. Now the military does become that over time, but initially the good thing about the military is they'll kind of take anybody and give you a chance, more or less. That there's some, certain things they have to line up for you. But that was one thing I liked, is I didn't have to know someone. Now that changed when I went to aviation, which was disappointing, and we'll talk about that later if you want. But
Absolutely.
on the infantry side and the special operations, it was like, hey man, we'll give you a chance. Oh, you don't know someone, you don't have a letter of recommendation. Yeah, we don't care about that, man. Just come out here and try out. And if you make it, you make it, man. And if you don't, it's like, well, hey, maybe try again, maybe try something else. there's a place for you out there, but it had zero to do with who you knew.
Well, and this brings up a good point here for our viewers listening and people who watch this video, is that Kirk and I's enlightening conversation about politics and who gets hired, who gets the jobs. Well, it proves that one, Marines aren't jarhead, and yes, jarheads, they can think. Yes, Marines are intelligent individuals. I I love that, the fact that we went into that conversation that I wasn't prepared for, simply because of the fact it is a reality in our world that, we do have public service jobs that people get preferred simply because of a name, and we see the results of that. And whether it's in the classroom, lack of what kids are being taught, whether it's being the content that's created, or as you mentioned in the public service area of protection, where we've got law enforcement officers dropping the job because they weren't prepared, all
Yeah.
because of a name. Yep.
Yeah, that's, a shame. When you talked about the jarhead, let me throw this out real quick for the history buffs and all that out there. I never met as many intellectual people as I did serving in the ground forces, whether that was the Marines or the Special Operations community. These were the smartest people I knew. And I'm not trying to throw rocks at aviation. I'm proud to be a military aviator. But when I came to aviation, there was always this outside view, like, oh, those are the smart people. And I was like, well, not necessarily. I mean, whereas over on the Marine side and the Special Operations side, you met a lot of philosophers, a lot of kind of amateur historians, a lot of people. Here's a quick one, and I'll let you go with it. But I know you like history. A lot of people say something to the effect of, "Oh, those Marines, they're so gung ho. They're just gung ho." And I'm like, yes, they are gung ho. Do you know what gung ho means? Because people think it's motivated and fanatical and all that. It comes from World War II. Well, it comes from the Marine Raiders, who later became Force Recon, who later became the MARSOC today. Gung ho comes from the China Marine, the Marines who served in China, serving with around the Chinese. They had a phrase called gung ho, and it means to work together. So the Marine Raiders, who became Force Recon, the Marine Raiders were the first organization that had enlisted and officers go through training together, regardless of rank. There was there's no difference in the training. Everyone went through the training together, and everyone's idea could be used. It didn't matter who you were, what your name was, what your rank was. A good idea was a good idea. And so their motto became gung ho, and gung ho means work together. So if anyone, and again, that comes from the Marines, the Marine Raiders in World War II. So when people say that, use that phrase incorrectly as if it's an insult, it's like, no, gung ho means to work together. Yes, I am gung ho. I want to work together.
Well, and with that, I mean, speaking of the Raiders and of course the foundation for Recon, it's incredible to think that even World War II, we had this idea of creating special operated units that would go in and do a job as quietly as possible and to an extent, but also jobs that many considered suicidal. I know the Raiders worked alongside the Paramarines during World War II, and they had a phenomenal fighting record until, of course, they were disbanded in '44. But I mean, it set the standard for what would eventually follow with the creation of Recon, and then Recon set the standard for you guys in the '90s and the evolution of MARSOC.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And to play it, or to bring it home with regard to the Paramarines and the Raiders, two of the Iwo Jima flag raisers were Paramarines. So two of the six who made it to that point were former Paramarines.
Yes, and I'm fortunate to own a couple of Paramarine items from World War II, named the guys who ended up fighting on Iwo, and it's incredible to be able to hold these artifacts, but to teach them in my classroom. A buddy of mine and I, we are planning a military museum in May in our school library, where we are going to have all of our artifacts spread around. We're going to have guest speakers, and part of that is going to be my collection of telling the story of the artifacts, the meaning behind the uniform, and who wore it. It's going to be really awesome. I'm excited.
Yeah, that's awesome, and that's a great experience. And like I said, thank you so much for taking the time to bring so much history forward to so many people that don't know it.
Thank you. I'm just the guy with the passion. Now, getting to history, let's get back to your boot camp experiences. Now, through boot camp, I know there's a lot of conditioning. There's a lot of physical fitness, but a lot of it's breaking you down as an individual and rebuilding you as a Marine. So what's that process like?
Yeah. It starts out with getting rid of your civilian clothes and anything personal that you own. You put them in a bag, and then you go get your head shaved, and everyone looks alike for the most part. We had some prior service guys there, and sometimes, usually that's a good thing. I did take issue with one person, and stop me if you've heard this story before, but we had a guy. He was a former French Army guy, and he looked like a bodybuilder. He looked like, a tough guy and all that. Well, he kept talking in line when the drill instructors weren't around. And again, you don't want to get in trouble here, man. And I felt like he was going to get me in trouble. So I turned around and I was like, hey, man, if I get in trouble because you're back there running your mouth, I'm going to beat your fucking ass. Because I don't want to get in trouble. You know what I mean? Because, and he couldn't believe that, like, what did you say? And I was like, hey, man, you heard me. Well, he kept going on about the being in the French Army and how this wouldn't be a big deal, and he quit like a couple of days later. Well, there's an example of a guy who's an individual who honestly thinks he's beyond, whatever. He's too cool for school type of thing. Well, he didn't make it. He quit. Like I said, in the first week, this guy that ran his mouth so much quit. Now, in my platoon, in that same platoon, we had a former staff sergeant from the Army. He had been in the 82nd. He had been in the infantry his entire career, and that's a tough lifestyle, man. And his body was starting to kind of, show its age, if you will, the mileage. And he went to his chain of command, and he was like, "Hey, man, I need to get out of the infantry, man. I've served my country, but I can't keep jumping out of airplanes, etc." And they're like, no, we need you. And he's like, look, man, I'm going to get hurt, man. If you don't let me change my MOS, I'll get out and go join the Marines. They're like, you're a senior non-commissioned officer in the 82nd Airborne. You're not going to get out and go join the Marines. They didn't change his MOS, so he got out and he joined the Marines. So here's another prior service guy. So he had every reason to be arrogant in boot camp, but he wasn't. He was just a quiet guy. He did what he was told. And I think it was several weeks before the drill instructors found out that this guy was a staff sergeant in the 82nd Airborne. And now he's a freaking private in Marine boot camp. He's cleaning toilets with a freaking, toothbrush or sponge or whatever it was. And they're just like, huh, so here's the one guy who is a me guy doesn't make it. The guy who's hey, this is a team effort. We all need to come together and be a leader. Not only does he make it, he's what's called a platoon guide, and he got meritorious Lance Corporal out of boot camp, which is a big deal. He was the honor man out of our platoon.
Wow.
And then he wound up going into like combat communications. So he's still a Marine or a combat troop, but he's not in the infantry. So he was able to kind of get a physical, what's the word? He wasn't jumping out of airplanes anymore. He wasn't carrying rucksacks every day type of thing like he did in the infantry. But he can finish out his career and bring all that knowledge forward. And he wound up getting, I believe it was meritorious corporal when we were out in 29 Palms, California. I saw him. He was in another unit. And so, man, sometimes you get taken care of, the good people get taken care of. But boot camp showed me that was my kind of first experience. Like I said, the guy that was the me guy washes out. The guy that has every reason to be the me guy, but is a we, an us team effort. He's very successful in boot camp.
Well, and even too, that carries over further into, life careers, post-military, if you're fortunate to get the job, but even in the military too, that mindset that, it's us. It takes us to survive out here. It takes us to get out of here, because the individual actions and antics oftentimes lead to the death of you or people around you.
That's exactly correct. in my career, I've seen some me first people, and man, they never work out, and they put lives at risk. And whenever I see them, I try to bring them up. First, I try to make the correction, and then I bring it up through the chain of command. And sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't. But those people are tremendously dangerous, man.
Well, and with that, I mean, you come into all sorts of contact with characters during boot camp, let alone your time in the Marine Corps too. And you mentioned, scrubbing toilets. I mean, people who've ever seen Full Metal Jacket, that's depicted there. You've got the hazing that happens. So, what are you witnessing in boot camp from the individuals around you?
Yeah. Well, my first couple of days, we lost a drill instructor because he dislocated a kid's shoulder, and so he got relieved. There was a fight in the mess hall over a donut. Killed a kid, killed another kid. I don't think intentionally. Who knows? Right before graduation, he beat a guy to death for over a donut. I remember we were doing some marching or something. And you see a lot of weird things, like there are some suicide attempts there. And I remember standing in formation, looking at the barracks, and we had a three-story barracks. And the drill instructors were like, what's that on the third deck, the third floor? And it was a sheet that was hanging out of a window. And somebody was like, it's a sheet, sir. And well, what happened was this kid wanted to commit suicide. He wanted to get off the island, man. You know what I mean? And so he tied his bed sheet to his rack, his bunk, and slid it toward the window. And he tied a knot around his neck. Well, he didn't tie the knot so well around his neck. He jumped out of the window intending to hang himself. The knot came loose and he fell 3 stories and he broke his leg, and they just kind of let him sit there for a little bit. I mean, they obviously came and got him, but they left the sheet up there as kind of a reminder. There's a lot of wisdom you can take from that. But it was the entire experience was scary, fascinating, interesting, educational. It was so many different emotions, but man, I learned a great deal at this place, man. As much as you hate being there, man, you learn a lot about people and life.
Absolutely, you do. I mean, that's what every Marine I've ever talked to, from World War II to present serving Marines, is that the impact boot camp leaves bad, but more importantly, the good things that you take away from boot camp. Now, through this too, are you starting to try to figure out what MOS you would be wanting to go into? 0311, 0351, 0331? What are you thinking?
Yeah, so when you usually you pick that when you go to your recruiter, unless you come in as what they call open contract. Now, I didn't come in open contract. I told him I wanted to go in the infantry. I want to go to infantry school. And stop me if you've heard this before, but my recruiter kind of pulled a kind of a fast one on me. He's like, "You want to be in the infantry?" And I'm like, yeah. Can you see me?
Yeah, I'm still here. The lights turned off.
But I said, look, I want to go in the Marines. I want to go in the infantry. And I guess I had some good scores or whatever. And there's this thing called a recruiting quota. You don't learn about this when you're 18 years old. But he's like, infantry. He goes, well, tell you what, I'm going to send you to the field radio operator course. And I was like, nah, man, I want to be in the infantry. I want to shoot machine guns. He's like, and this is the recruiter in him, like, oh man, you're going to be in the infantry and you're going to shoot machine guns, but you're going to carry the radio. You're going to call in airstrikes. You're going to call in medevac. You're going to be the man. You're the most destructive person in the platoon. You got the radio. I'm like, really? Seriously? He goes, oh yeah. And you can still carry a machine gun. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And that's the infantry. He goes, well, you're going to go to infantry school first, and then you go to these, because it's special training. Only special people can do it. But I think you got what it takes, that type of square or whatever it was. And so that's what I did. I signed on the dotted line, and what really happened was, in those days, everyone went to infantry school. There were 2 infantry schools. There was the basic infantry school and the advanced infantry school. The basic infantry school was called, I want to say Marine Combat Training or something like that. And it was, the basic infantry tactics. And then from there, if your MOS was infantry, you went to the advanced infantry school, which was, I think it was Infantry Training Battalion. I think it was ITB. I think that's what it was. So for me, I went to the basic infantry school, and then I go to 29 Palms, California for the field radio operator course. So technically, even though he told me I was going in the infantry, my primary MOS was 2531 field radio operator. Now, the plus side to that is Recon only takes 2 feeder MOSs, infantry and field radio operator. So it wound up doing me a solid, even though he did not intend to, I'm sure. So he wound up doing me a solid at the end of the day.
Well, if your recruiter was listening to this, would there be anything you would like to tell him now that we're in 2024?
Hey, man, I don't take it personal, bro. I get it. I don't take it personal. I know you were under command pressure and all those other things. So, man, I don't take it personal.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, and through that, and as you learn and as you know, RTOs, referred to in Vietnam, World War II, ROs for the present. I've heard it used interchangeably. They have an incredibly vital role, whether it's with a squad, platoon, company level, or even in force recon. I mean, you are the lifeline to supporting arms if necessary.
Absolutely. And certainly I took pride in my job when I got to that level.
Now, getting to that too, as boot camp progresses, and you eventually go to the rifle range. Now, what kind of rifles were you working with in this time period?
This was the M16A2, I believe. The long barrel. We saw them in Iraq in like 2004, and we called them muskets because everybody else had MP4s or M4s. So we referred to them as muskets later on. But yeah, the M16A2 with iron sights. We didn't have optics back then.
Now, with that being said, what kind of ranges were you shooting at? 200, 300, 400, or was it further?
You started out, I want to say, I think you sighted in at 50 meters, and then you zeroed it at 100, I think. But you shot targets. I want to say it started at 100 meters for the qualification, went out to 500 meters. And when you hear that every Marine is a rifleman, man, that's 100% correct. And they trace that back to the 1775 during the initial Revolutionary War, and talk about that if you want. But they really stress the fundamentals of marksmanship, and you can get really advanced in depending on what unit you go to is how far advanced you get in your shooting. But nothing beats even the Delta Force guys will tell you, man, it's the fundamentals, master the basics. And that's what the Marines did. They mastered the basics. So you had guys literally, man, and I'm not exaggerating, who had never fired a weapon in their life. And the Marine Corps was taking them and they were able to shoot an iron sight rifle at 500 meters accurately, man. And it was really something to behold. So, man, there's just no doubt that the training process is on the right track.
Well, for you, speaking of qualification and on the range, how did you qualify on the range?
I qualified expert. I want to say I had one of the top scores, and what that allowed me to do, I got a Burger King sandwich, and I got a phone call home for being an expert. Man, I took a lot of pride in that. Obviously, man, I think there was only 5 or 6 of us that shot expert, and man, I stuffed that damn whatever it was, a double whopper or whatever the hell the senior drill instructor was like, anybody that gets expert, I'll get him a whopper. And I was like, oh yeah, boy, that's and again, that's leadership, positive. I learned this in Force Recon because there was a lot of sports psychology type stuff in the special operations community. That's called positive reinforcement, and you can get more with positive reinforcement. Actually, that's a sports psychology thing, which I think only exists in the special ops community. I never saw it anywhere else, which is a shame because you could have a much more productive military. But in any case, He was like, "You shoot expert, I'll get you a Whopper from Burger King." And buddy, I'm out there, man, just, the fundamentals, man, slow trigger squeeze, the proper breath, and got expert. And man, I sucked that Whopper down in probably less than a minute, man. It was,
Well, it's the incentive there. I mean, you've been given a goal and you set your mind to achieve that. And that's one of the, in my opinion, one of the ways that, that encourages you to excel in boot camp, but also in life. Create goals. I mean, that's an excellent goal setting target. So when boot camp comes to its closure, graduation day approaches, what is it like being on the parade ground, graduating, and now officially earning the title of Marine?
yeah. It was, I never, again, I was never interested in being a Marine, man. It was kind of a resume builder type of thing. Like I said, I want to go SF, but I thought this was a good place to start with the solid training. But I really liked that they focused on history and combat history and famous battles. Man, I was really digging that. I was really digging that the higher ranking people had combat decorations. It wasn't just, hey, I went to this school, I went to that school. It seemed like to get promoted in the Marines, you had to have combat experience. That was my impression. And then on graduation day, I mean, I was happy that I was leaving, but it wasn't a big deal that much until I went and I dropped my sea bag. It's your duffel bag, and you always give the actual, because you're not quite a Marine yet. You will be a Marine by the end of the day, but you're not really a Marine. You're still a private. With some of the battalions called them recruits, and some we called it private in second battalion where I went. But again, I was glad to be leaving Paris Island, but I really wasn't like, oh, I'm a Marine. That never hit me till I drop off my sea bag, and here comes one of the female, because we have the female battalion there, fourth battalion, I think it is, and one of the female drill instructors is just happened to be walking by, and you always give the greeting of the day to the Marines, and I said something like, "Good morning, ma'am." And she stopped and she looked at me, and she knew what was about to happen. And she just said, "Good morning, Marine." And she walked off. And that was the first time in my life, obviously the first time that someone could call me a Marine, even though technically I wasn't a Marine yet. There's a couple hours before the ceremony. But man, it was just overwhelming, man. It was like, holy shit, I'm a Marine, man. I am a United States Marine. And that person just, this person the drill instructors you look up to, and this drill instructor acknowledged that. You know what I mean? She acknowledged that I'm a United States Marine. And man, I'm telling you, man, my head, it just changed on a dime, man. It just, my whole attitude, everything changed right there and then, man. And it was just a really phenomenal, just an incredible experience. That one little weird, strange, brief encounter that probably never happens to anybody. It happened to me. And man, it just took me in a totally different direction with my life.
It's incredible to think about the small interactions that can literally change our lives in one direction or the other. And people perhaps don't even realize that. And I mean, your mind is now completely fixated on the fact that you're into it. I am a Marine now.
Yeah.
And that then leads us into eventually, of course, going into Force Recon. But let's talk about 29 Palms. I've talked to a lot of guys about the basic infantry school with the Vietnam veterans, and I know that outside of weaponry, that didn't change much, but I've heard a lot of great stories about 29 Palms, and I know that was a lovely place to always be.
Sure. Yeah.
So getting there at 29 Palms, is this your first time in California?
Man, yeah, it's my first time in California, and I think I just turned 19 years old, and I'm like, wow, California, holy crap, and it certainly wasn't what I thought it was going to be, but it was interesting to be there.
Now, 29 Palms, exactly where is that located?
It's I think we flew into Los Angeles, LAX, and then we got on a bus and we went past Riverside, which is a kind of a suburb of LA, I think, out towards really nice town. I can't remember the name. I have to look at a map. There's a really nice town on the way. It's kind of upper class. I mean, I can't remember the name of it. I'll have, like I said, I'll have to look at a map. But once you get past the that town, man, you're in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's desert, scorpions and snakes and whatever, and you just drive through a gate, and holy crap, you're at this humongoloid Marine Corps base, and that's 29 Palms.
Now, speaking of snakes and being in 29 Palms, did you ever have any interactions with the rattlesnakes out there?
I don't believe I don't remember ever seeing snakes or anything like that. No, I don't think so.
Well, and with that, getting there, you're now starting your training as a field radio operator. And so, what's that training like?
Yeah, and this is older technology compared to today. Obviously, we learned about high HF, high frequency radios, VHF, very high frequency, UHF, ultra high frequency. And in those days, you had to have a different radio for each type of, like a SATCOM radio was a separate radio from your VHF radio, which you talked to. I forgot who you talked to with the VHF, but the UHF was for aircraft. So as a radio operator, man, you could be carrying 3 different very heavy radios, and each one has a different type of battery, which is a different size and different weight, and you have to have extra batteries. So your equipment is tremendously heavy before you even start adding, ammunition, water, socks, whatever, man. So it's like, if you didn't go to the gym, you were going to go to the gym. There was like, hey, man, you can't be small and be a radio operator. And I was a good runner and a good swimmer. So I had to start, eating extra and hitting the weights, man, because it was a very physical job carrying all that stuff, man.
Well, that and carrying a machine gun too, that. Well, and with that, I mean, did you have an assistant to help carry any of the extra batteries? Because, I mean, we're probably talking, what, 80, 90 pounds of total equipment, if not more?
Yeah, at the school, every the road marches, everyone's carrying the same equipment, because it's the schoolhouse. Now, once I got to a recon team, what you tried to do, I'll get that call later.
No worries, Kirk.
With my resume, people are always calling like, "Hey, man, are you willing to work for?" And I got to think about it. But where was I? So at the schoolhouse, everyone's carrying the same equipment. But when I got to the recon team, not quite a year later, when I got to recon, we were working in 4-man teams, and you had to distribute the weight as equally as you could. Having said that, everyone was carrying just an amazing amount of weight, man. If you really want to take the capability of a force recon team, and it's only 4 guys, and again, I think it changes, but at the time it was a 4-man team. You're just carrying an amazing amount of weight, man. It's just a shocking amount of weight. If you look at some of the operations in Vietnam, they were probably only good for about 72 hours, maybe 96 hours, because you can only carry so many batteries and water. Today with vehicles, depending on what type of terrain you're going and with the capability of being resupplied with a small drone, it might be a little different. But and of course, the radios today, you have smaller radios that have multi-functions. So it's a much better, the technology has caught up for more or less to the point. It's still a shitty job, man. There's no doubt. There are no shortcuts in the special operations. But it is a much better setup today. It's not easier. It's just more user friendly to have a single source radio.
Well, speaking of the recon teams working with the radios as well, what were the requirements to get into recon for the 90s?
Yeah. So, you had to volunteer. Number one, you had to, you had to come from a feeder MOS, and I think I'd have to ask the guys that didn't have that MOS if they were sent to that school prior to that. Again, I'm not sure, but I had the feeder MOS, being a field radio operator. So number one, you volunteer. Number two, you go and you take what's called an NDOC. And so it's a full day kind of PT test, if you will. And there's there's going to be the standard PT test and a road march and an obstacle course and some other things, and then it's fucking dealer's choice, man. It's whatever they can kind of come up with, to see who's left at the end of the day. And so if you pass, like I said, it's kind of a PT test of sorts, but they call it the NDOC, and then you go to the Recon indoctrination platoon, and that's usually about 3 months. And it's kind of more of the same. There's a lot of it's still a selection phase, but it's also a preparation phase. So it's kind of both. There's the swimming, there's the running, but there's also classes like, hey, this is a Zodiac boat. This is the motor. The motor is, I think it was 85 horsepower or something like that. This is how you put fuel into it. This is how you prime the engine. We still had M60s in those days. We were just getting the M240s. This is the M60. This is how you fire it. This is how you carry it. This is where you put the extra ammo. So it might be, a morning of just getting the shit kicked out of you in the pool, and then a road march or something like that, and all kinds of games that people come up with and obstacle courses, but then there's some classes in there, maybe there's 30 minutes or an hour between this evolution and that evolution. They're going to give you a class, hey, these are ropes you need to, or these are knots you absolutely need to learn how to tie, because you may have to secure the boat or something to the boat, or this particular knot, if you tie C4, the det cord, around like a tree, for example, to make a hasty landing zone for helicopters. So you are actually you're getting the shit kicked out of you for sure, but you are learning some stuff as well. And then once you successfully pass that portion, then you start going through the formal training. And the very first thing that you got to get through is amphibious reconnaissance school, and it's an 8-week course.
Well, and speaking of that course and leading up to it, I've got the photograph I'll pull up here in a minute. But is this where you came into contact with Doc Norton's Force Recon Diary books, or was that later?
No, I found his book in high school. I read his book in high school.
And that's where we get into, of course, the inspiration of that and what led you into Recon. And so speaking of that amphibious school, we've got this photograph, if I'm not mistaken, right here.
Yep, that's Key West, Florida. That's the home of the Special Operations Combat Dive Qualification Course. If you're in Special Operations and you go through the scuba training, you'd be what they call a combat diver. And if you look at my chest there, that's what they call a LAR-5 or a Dregger system. It's a rebreather. It doesn't send out bubbles. It's very, very quiet. And I can tell you some funny stories about how close you can get to lobsters because they don't hear you. And you can snag a lot of lobsters underwater if that's what you have time for, is all I'm going to say. And I'm not going to say I did that in Key West, but let's just say you can do that. You can almost talk to each other underwater because there's a little gap in the mouthpiece. So in a real pinch, you can get over to someone's head and kind of whisper to them or talk to them underwater. And I'm sure they have better stuff now or whatever, but that was kind of like your backup commo plan is just get right up in the guy's ear and be like, hey man, we're, whatever, 3,000 meters from the shore or whatever, according to my timetable, stuff like that. Or you have the little tack board where you write on it and just show it to the guy and it gives you or it gives you the okay. Cause that actually means go to the surface, but that means okay. So yeah, that was advanced training. You had to make it through a lot of the, like I said, the initial training, the NDOC and the RIP and the ARS, you had to get through all that before you started the other training, and
Well,
that would have been the advanced training.
speaking of the training too, for with Force Recon, especially this initial scuba school, what are you learning initially in that first little 8-week dive period?
Yeah, you're learning. You learned how to calculate tides and currents at ARS because that's part of your job. When you get to scuba school, you're learning dive physics. There's pressure on the body, and depending on how long it's at a particular pressure is what it does to your body. There's more technology involved in subsurface operations than there is in outer space operations, just to give you an idea. So there's a lot of physical things it does, or physiological things it does to your body, and you have to learn um, what that does to you, et cetera. Um, you have to calculate your bottom time. Now with the Dregger, you're probably not going to go below 12 feet, maybe 20 feet deep, because you're not trying to get down somewhere. You're just trying to hide and get to a beach or a ship somewhere without being detected. So you can stay at 12 feet for, I can't remember how long, but a good deal of time. Whereas if you're doing a recovery dive, you're using open circuit scuba, and let's say you're going down to 100 feet below the surface. Well, maybe you can only be down there for 10 minutes. And sorry if I have the math wrong. I hadn't done it in probably 30 years, but you get the idea. You have to calculate your bottom time. I did a body recovery dive right after scuba school, and that was what the dive supervisors were doing. Like, hey, you can only be down for 15 minutes. We were recovering persons from a, long story short, there was a train wreck, and they went into the water. There was a post crash fire. The Coast Guard found it, and they reported the train tracks being out, the bridge being out, the train in the water, and a fire. That was misinterpreted. That was misinterpreted as a terrorist attack took out a bridge. So the FBI SWAT team was called in, and we had a good working relationship with them. And so they requested us because we were combat divers. And so we went there. And of course, what we found out was it was a series of mistakes. An individual got lost at night with his barges, and he hit the bridge, and he didn't know it. Was essentially what happened. But he knocked the tracks off like 4 inches, and when a passenger train hit it at, I want to say, like 80 miles an hour, all that kinetic energy just took out the bridge, and several cars went into the water. And it took us 3 days to recover all the bodies, but that was part of it, and that was like a week after scuba. Like most people get out of scuba school, like, man, it's going to be a couple of months before you guys get in the water again, and it's like, okay, well, it is what it is, and you show up, and it's like, hey, man, grab your shit, man. We're going on a real world, dive mission, man. And like I said, the first word was it was a terrorist attack. And of course, we found out later it wasn't. But you're getting spun up like, dude, I didn't think I'd be getting in the water for another month or so, and here I am on a real world mission. So that was interesting.
Well, and a lot of people too have this concept that in the military you only encounter dead and casualties in war zones, and clearly that's not the case. Special operations military units get called in to assist in any kind of disasters that happen in the United States. So for you, was this your first interaction with dead bodies and casualties?
Generally speaking, yeah. I without getting too deep into it, I had kind of a traumatic childhood,
Right.
so this wasn't the first dead body I've ever seen. But this was, as I recall, I think this was the first time I was around what we call a mass casualty event. I think it was 55 some odd people had died and had to be recovered, including children. Now I was very fortunate, whether I purposely chose not to do it. I just don't remember, or if it just worked out for me. But I never had to put my hands on a dead child. And I did see there was I think she was 8 years old. An 8-year-old girl had floated up to the surface at one point. And I did see her, and I did acknowledge that we needed to get her. But one of the other NCOs saw it, immediately dove in and went and grabbed her body. And man, I was just very, very thankful he did that, man, because honestly, I didn't want to do it. You know?
Absolutely. I mean, and with dealing with civilian casualties, I guess from a military standpoint, is different than military casualties, just because in the military, casualties are expected, but working with civilians, that's not always the case, right?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And you do see people's character. You know, people deal with things in different ways. This was one of the first times in my life that I saw toxic leadership. Um, I don't want to get too deep into it, but we had a commander um, who said some very disrespectful things, and I think he was trying to pump himself up. He sure as shit wasn't impressing any of us with his stories of recovering let's just say the elderly and the women and things of that nature.
Right.
And I was like, man, this guy's a fucking piece of shit. And I didn't like the guy anyway, and no one else did. He was, like I said, this was the first time I saw a toxic leader. I was disappointed that it was in the Marines. I was disappointed it was in Recon. I saw it again later in my career, and you are going to see these people in your career, man. It's a real thing. But this was the first time I saw it, and like I said, I'm not going to get into it too deep. But he made some disparaging comments about the bodies, and I was like, if you weren't the commander, you know what I mean. If he were a sergeant or a captain saying this, then his boss would really crawl up his ass. But because he was a major, he was the commander. No one really could say anything to him. But we all knew it, man. This guy's a
Right.
piece of shit. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, unfortunately, that's everywhere in our lives. Now, speaking of this, and to end on some lighter notes for our first interview, so before we get to the book, your call sign or nickname, Tadpole. So,
Tadpole.
how did this come about? Assuming it's appropriate.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So my first time in combat was 2004 in Iraq, and I was working for Blackwater, and you got a call sign. Usually, the call sign could be good if you did something good, but 9 times out of 10, it was something that you messed up. We had an individual. His call sign was Cage. He locked himself in the armory one night inadvertently, so his call sign was Cage. We had another guy. His name was his call sign was Dump Star, like instead of dumpster, Dump Star, because he backed into a dumpster and tore up the vehicle. Um, so I felt pretty good, man. I didn't really have a crazy call sign. I was just Kirk for initially. Well, we had a guy named Stumpy. He was a shorter guy. He was a former Chicago Police Department guy, and he was a practical joker, man. And he knew how to do like being a cop. He knew how to do that verbal ninja stuff, right? He knew how to kind of get you going. He knew how to poke, find your weakness. And we had a guy on the team, great, a great friend of mine, great solid teammate named James Flynn. And I talk about James in the book as I do the others. James was one of the many teammates I've had who chose to take his own life years later, and that's a sad reality of our community. And certainly, I'm doing my best to kind of stop that in the power that I have with the book and the stories. But James was he was a former SEAL team guy, or we just say team guy, and he was very proud. And this was not a special ops program; it was a State Department program. So there was a lot of blustering and chest beating and butt sniffing and all that type of stuff. As you would imagine, young men do. Well, he was just so he was, like I said, so cool. Mr. Cool Guy. I was a team guy. Blah 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 blah. His call sign was 7. He was with SEAL Team 7, but he just wore it on his sleeve. He just always when I was in the SEALs, when I went to Buds, SEALs, Bud, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's like you get tired of hearing the stories after a while. Like, okay, man, let's just go eat or something. So anyway, we're sitting there at the dining facility one day. And Stumpy knew that I'd been to 2 scuba schools, you know, the Navy scuba school and the Army scuba school. And with the pre-scuba, I think it was 13 weeks of combined training, right? So 13 weeks versus the scuba phase at Buds is 8 weeks. So 7 had been to 8 weeks of training. I had 13 weeks of training, and no one really cared except for 7 because that was his whole identity, right? So Stumpy starts out the conversation with, hey, 7 is how hard is Buds? And it's hard. It's, people die, whatever, right? He goes, well, how long is the scuba phase? And he's, oh, it's 8 weeks, 8 weeks. Is it? Oh my God, it's so hard, it's so hard. And he looks at me, he goes, 8 weeks. He goes, Kirk, you went to 13 weeks of training. He only has 8 weeks, and so your training is way harder than his. And man, he just lost his mind, man, because that was his whole identity. He had built his whole identity around, being a team guy and going to Buds. So he didn't know what to do with himself, man. He got mad. He stood up. He threw his food. He goes storming out of the chow hall, and he stops about halfway. And he turns around. He points at me. He goes, "You're not a frog man, but you're a tadpole." And he walks off. So from then on, I was Tadpole.
That is incredible. Military nicknames never get old for me. I mean, there's
Oh yeah,
always a excellent story associated with it. I mean, and that's brilliant. And I know that that's going to be in the book. And to end out our first interview today, I was going to bring this up real quick, if permitted. You've got
sure.
a book coming out, and I was going to give you the floor to talk about your book, its expected publication, but what it's about.
Absolutely, I thank you, and that comes from my website. There, if the actual cover is me doing vehicle interdiction operation. It's the other cover, but that's fine that you have that on there. The other cover will be, like I said, me with the sniper rifle, and it's War Junkie, a cautionary tale. I want to make sure that people know that. I think, and I'm not throwing stones at anybody, but there's a lot of stuff in the media, social media, the podcast, and there's a lot of chest beating and things of that nature, and there's a lot of misunderstandings about a life in special operations or combat aviation or any type of combat arms. Going to war. There's kind of a misunderstanding. I think it's always been romanticized. I, every book I ever read about it always kind of gave the reader both sides of it. If it's a firsthand account, it's both sides of it. And over time, I kind of got tired of people, especially the stolen valor, because the stolen valor, it's people just talking about the positives, and they never have any negative stories, and they didn't have to live through that. And it's like, no, you're lying, you're making that up, stolen valor. But again, you have some of the podcasts that are, I think, a little over the top with, hey, I'm so awesome, I did this, and it's like that. I think that's disingenuous. I think telling the truth. I think the truth is a good story personally. So the truth as I know it, as I saw it. Again, these are recollections of what I saw. A great deal of it is heroism that I saw of other people who were never acknowledged for their heroism, and that really really bothered me, man. That people could put forth so much effort and never get any recognition. So that really pissed me off. So I felt like I should. And I give names where I'm able to. If not, I'll be happy to tell you who they are later if they give me permission later. But that really pissed me off that you had that I saw. Man, I saw some you wouldn't believe some of the things I've seen people do, either in combat when bullets are flying, but also moral courage when you have every reason to just toe the company line and get along, go along to get along. And I saw a number of people say, no, that's wrong. That's not how we're going to do business. We're going to do this. And so I put that in the book. So the heroism that I saw other people do is in there. I absolutely positively talk about the cowardice in leadership. I've seen it so many times. Toxic leaders, coward leaders. It's an epidemic. There's a reason why we haven't won a war since 1945. It's not just happenstance. There's some horrible leaders out there in the United States military, and they get promoted, man. Some of your top leaders are people who are cowards from the day they walk in, and that's a damn shame. So I call that out in the book. And then the third is kind of the downside. Like I said, man, I served as a Force Recon Marine, and the only job I could find was being a bouncer. No one gave a shit about Force Recon or Rangers or SEALs or any of those guys. Now, the global war on terror changed that. Having said that, you go to combat over and over and over and over, and then you come back and you got to transition, and it's the same old thing. Nobody will hire you, man. I decided, because I kind of saw this movie before, I decided to go in the opposite direction of carrying a rifle. I went into aviation, and so I can get a job based on my aviation background, which I'm fortunate to be able to do that. But that's a rare thing, if you will. There are a lot of people out there who are underemployed. So that's kind of the book. It's heroism that I saw people do. It's cowardice that I saw leaders do, and it's the downside to this lifestyle. If you choose to go into the military, into the combat arms, man, thank you for your service, but man, please be prepared to pay the piper on so many levels. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying, please get ahead of the power curve, man. These are the things you're going to deal with.
Amen.
Yeah. The suicide, the depression, the PTSD, the underemployment, divorce, drug use, alcoholism, you name it, man. You name it.
Well, and I think that in many cases we need, like you say, those true stories of what it's really like, not just during the conflict, but post-conflict. And I think you brought up an excellent point in our conversation prior to the recording of asking a mentor, how did you do this? And I think that's what we need for our younger military veterans currently serving, and those who will serve, is older veterans who have been there to mentor, because as you and I mentioned, there's not a lot of agencies out there that are helping.
There's not, man.
And so through that, Kirk, this was a brilliant first interview, at least in my opinion. And I always end this for all of my veterans. Thank you for your service and welcome home.
Well, thank you for what you're doing for the community, man. You're doing more than I think you realize. So, man, please don't undersell your piece in all this. Thank you for making me the first non-Vietnam vet on your program, and thank you for reaching out to the GWAT guys. Like I said, I can't thank you enough, and for what you're doing.
Thank you. That means a lot. Kirk, we'll be in touch, and we'll do this again in the future. So have an amazing day, my friend.
Thank you so much, Zach. We'll see you next time.